Hello. Today we're going to be talking about one of the greatest documents in human history, the Magna Carta. As always, I need you to do this in Cornell Note style. Please measure and draw a line from top to bottom about 2 inches from the left-hand side. Don't worry about drawing a summary line today. We'll do the summary in class. In today's lecture, we're going to be talking about King John, the Magna Carta, and the impact the Magna Carta had. Let's take a look at this picture here. In this scene, we see noblemen and yes, even some church members in the background, as King John in the foreground is being forced to sign the Magna Carta. That's right, in 1215, the king was forced to sign the Magna Carta. He either signed it or he lost England. To understand the Magna Carta, we have to understand King John. John was the younger brother of Richard. John wasn't supposed to be king. And when his brother Richard died in the Crusades, John took over. The problem is, John had no inheritance. He took over as king but had no land, so he had no money. And so when he went to war with France, he had to raise taxes. He did this without asking the nobles. He just said, I need more money, and raised taxes, charged more feudal dues, and even insisted on old payments that had been forgotten over 100 years. He went to war with France, and then of course lost. This did not make him very popular with the nobles. On top of that, he got in an argument with Pope Innocent III. You see, at that time, the Archbishop of Canterbury had died, and the new archbishop had to be chosen, so John took it upon himself to choose. Of course, the Pope felt that since he was the head of the church, he should be allowed to choose. This led to an argument that got John excommunicated from the church, and the Pope banned anyone in England from receiving any church services such as marriage or last rites and baptism. In effect, John's argument with the Pope pretty much put every English soul in crisis. John eventually gave in, but this again didn't make the nobles very happy. You see, the way the system worked under feudalism, the barons or landowners paid taxes and supplied John with soldiers. In exchange, John, granted them land. Well, they had already had this land for hundreds of years and, of course, been paying taxes and soldiers. But when John needed more, he just kept raising taxes. Those who complained, and there were many people complaining about the high taxes, started grumbling and started getting together. Now, one of the ways that John raised taxes was through tariffs. A tariff is a tax on imported goods. So John could charge an extra fee on any goods that came into England. This directly affected the nobles because imported goods were only purchased by the nobility. These landowners found that they could no longer afford the things that they liked because of the high taxes. If you complained, you could be thrown in jail. Your land could be taken away from you, and you could be held in prison without a trial. This, of course, led to the stories of Robin Hood and his band of merry men, as Robin Hood, an ex-noble, lost his land due to the cruel John's tyranny. Now, of course, the Robin Hood story isn't true, but it does focus in on that point of history. Now, John was the king, and he believed that God gave him his powers. He didn't care what the other nobles said. He felt that he could pass any law and change any law, and nothing applied to him. Well, the nobles didn't like it, and they complained, and they threatened to go to war against their own king. So, John went to war against the barons. The barons united. They came in and they conquered London. John ended up losing. This put John in a really bad place. He could lose his government. He could lose his head. Many of the barons were afraid. They'd never had a government without a king. But some of them were so upset they wanted to try it without it. But John signed the Magna Carta. Now, the Magna Carta is a document that defines the rule of law. It says this is how we run the government. What's really happening here is we're taking the rules that everyone believed to be true and writing them down. So John couldn't change the rules. Now, the document contains 63 different articles. Most of these concerned limiting the power of John, making sure the king couldn't change the rules, making sure he had to follow the rules. But it also secured certain rights to the barons, like the right of a trial. You couldn't be thrown in jail without due process. You could travel within England and even leave England and not have your land taken away. And that you were allowed to own property, and if it was confiscated, this had to be through due process. It had to be through a trial. It couldn't just be confiscated. And finally, if the king wanted to raise taxes, he'd have to ask the barons. He'd have to call together a meeting of all the barons, and then they would either allow it or not. This is a strong impact on John. Here's a man who took over the crown and basically, like his predecessors, was able to do anything he wanted to, but not anymore. This document would be held in front of him every time he wanted to raise taxes. He would have to negotiate now. He would have to work with the nobles. He couldn't just do things on his own. This document forced King John to follow the law. He was told time and time again that he couldn't take away rights from the barons and that he couldn't just make new laws up or new taxes up without their consent. In the long run, some of these rights will eventually be passed on to the common people. And the government itself will change from a monarchy where the king rules over everything to a constitutional monarchy where the king and the people as a parliament work together and they share the power of government. In fact, this document, the Magna Carta, will eventually be used as a stepping stone for our own constitution. That's right, our founding fathers examined the Magna Carta when they too were trying to create our own constitution.